in his PICU. Thanks, Mark. Please.
Thank you very much, Matteo and John, and thanks to Anne-Marie for setting the scene there very nicely. I've been asked to give the con side of the debate about why all paediatric patients should not receive ECPR. I think it's really important. I think it's important that we challenge the perceived dogma of our previous 4 speakers. We spent a lot of time speaking about why we should do ECPR. And I suppose being asked to do this talk has made me question that. And I would ask each of the people listening to this and watching this to question what's right in their own institutions. So why do we spend so much time in this? And really, is it that big an issue? Have we lost sight of the bigger picture? What's really important in our units? And I suppose, as we've all realised in the last year or so, what's important in society? Where are we best to spend our money? I suppose as a disclosure, I see ECMO as a friend, but I'm also pragmatic in that view of my ECMO friend. I think it's appropriate at times, but I think it's inappropriate at some times as well. So we'll maybe touch on some of those things. What we have seen across the world and all the literature, and Anne-Marie's described it very nicely, is the increasing use of ECPR. Now that worries me. And I think it should worry each of us. In the UK, for example, 1/3 of cardiac ECMO in paediatrics is now ECPR. Now, why is that happening? I would question that, and I think maybe that's because we're ducking the difficult questions we need to ask ourselves before ECPR. And I think we should move the debate forward, or back in time, sorry. So we should have that debate ahead of the patient needing ECPR. So I would, my opening point in response to Anne-Marie is that ECPR is a failure of our intensive care systems to support these patients properly. And the reason for that really makes me question the evidence around ECPR. There really is not a huge amount of fantastic evidence out there. There are never going to be randomized controlled studies on this. And we've got some excellent registry reviews, but they're phenomenally center biased. That worries me again as to why we're doing this. And again, makes me think about our ECMO pathways in each of our institutions and why it's important. And as part of this, I think like in anything we do in medicine these days, we need to take a step back and think about not only the evidence for that practice, but actually think about the cost-benefit ratio for our patients and wider society. And I think it's really, really essential that we think of that wider picture. The health economics aspects of ECMO, of intensive care, paediatric intensive care, are phenomenally important. I've read a lot around this recently. My daughter is now doing an economics degree, and actually lots of really, really interesting discussions around the spend on money and how we should spend our money. And really is ECPR, which is a highly costly process, really the right thing to do for the small marginal gains that we'll get out of that. Now that's important because society is changing. Okay, our population is getting older, and this is data from the European Union. So the number of young patients, so our clients, our patients, the patients we're looking after, there are less and less of them these days. We're all going to be out of a job soon. So we've got a shrinking paediatric population. So why are we finding so much time to focus on ECPR, which is a small part of that? And if you look at the population impact of in-hospital cardiac arrest, and Anne-Marie's already highlighted the Get With The Guidelines registry data, which shows the incidence, a really, really good paper. Go and look at it, okay? And it shows that those less than 18 years old, so there's over 73 million people in the US who are less than 18 years old. And of all those patients, there were just over 15,000 in-hospital cardiac arrests. That's 0.021% of that population. So it's a tiny, tiny part of the population that we're thinking of, but it's the patients that are in front of us that are important. And we need to think about how big an issue really is this to the taxpayers or the people that pay for healthcare, okay? So moving on, how many of those patients have access to ECMO after an in-house cardiac arrest? Now, if you look at that, the similar paper or similar data, actually less than 10% of the hospitals in these and this registry data actually had 10 or more PICU beds. So I would suggest that maybe those are the centres that might have access to ECMO. So a huge percentage of these patients will not have access to ECMO. So really, is it the thing we should be thinking about for everyone else? And again, just question how small an issue or how large an issue this is moving forward. Going back to a paper that has been discussed already in JAMA this year, again, it's well worth having a look. It picked up very clearly on the previous reports that approximately 3.1% of patients after cardiac surgery will have an arrest. Now, if you look at the recent paper from the UK, it's not dissimilar. It's 2% in Barney Schofield's paper. But again, as Anne-Marie's highlighted, most paediatric in-hospital cardiac arrests happen in intensive care. Most are intubated. Most have a non-shockable rhythm. Therefore, we know when they're going to happen. Therefore, we should not, our need for eCPR should be very, very low. We need to think about this beforehand and put these patients on ECMO in a timely fashion and not duck the issue. If you look at conventional CPR, the mortality associated with that in most papers is around about 50%, 50 to 55% with conventional CPR. If you look at the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest data, actually that's an evidence-free zone. So I would exclude these patients from having access to eCPR in my mind, because there is absolutely no evidence to back that up. If you look at the outcomes, so Tim has very nicely demonstrated neurological issues, and what we've seen is there's an increasing use of eCPR, as we've already talked about. They tend to be small patients. They tend to be associated with cardiac disease. And the mean time to ECMO in this paper, or this review, was 43 minutes, which is excellent. And Anne-Marie's team in Toronto are leading that and leading on reviewing these pathways and improving these pathways, which is great. But again, it just makes me think we've missed the boat. The mean duration of ECMO was 103 hours. Again, 54% died. So that's probably not much different to the conventional CPR group. So what are we doing? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And 70% of these patients had an unfavourable neurological outcome, was the review or outcome of this systematic review. So I went to the ELSO data to see what is happening in ELSO. And actually, ELSO provides us with so many fantastic potentials to get answers to some difficult questions. So I looked at the data just last week and went into the registry, and I thought, we've cracked it. 2021, we've got 95%, 96% mortality by patient cohort in neonatal eCPR. This is obviously the wrong thing to do. My debate is written here. Close it off. And if you look at the pediatric eCPR patients, the mortality is around about 60%. So again, what are we doing? It's not changed over time from the ELSO data. Looking at this. Now, the outcomes of eCPR are really important from a neurological point of view, but also from other end organ point of view. And Tim and others have already mentioned the THAPCA study, where they looked at it as a separate or subgroup analysis of those patients that went on ECMO and looked at neurological outcomes. But again, it was limited due to study design and poor and varied follow-up, and that's not dissimilar to several studies out there. Somehow, though, it's got into the UK Resuscitation Council guidelines that ECMO should form part of post-resuscitation care, and it may be of benefit to patients with cardiac disease, where it can be instituted rapidly. And if you look at the recent ILCOR statement in 2019, again, it's in there, but it's very, very clear. This is really, really important. It may be considered for pediatric patients with cardiac diagnoses in a setting where there are existing protocols. But there really is insufficient evidence for its use in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest or non-cardiac disease. So this maybe gives us a little bit more room to question our behaviour or our behaviours that we have in place. So it's not important for these other ones. Taking it back to the health economic aspects, it's important to think about the opportunity costs of eCPR. This is a massive impact on our cardiac surgery programs, our ability to operate the next VSD, the next tetralogy fellow. It has a massive impact potentially on blood product utilisation at times where ECMO might be better used elsewhere. It has a massive impact on staff burnout. It has a fiscal impact on the acute care and the long-term medical care with the long-term issues that do occur with these patients and that impact on their families. And it's important to think about the end organ impacts on the individual patient, but also family stability, the fiscal burden for that family, as well as the long-term fiscal burden for the healthcare sector. So I'd ask you just to think about it in each of your sectors, each of your nations, and think about what's right in there and how we deliver this moving forward. I think the road ahead is pretty unclear, but I think it's important that we look backwards, look into the mirror as we shape the way forward. We need to challenge the dogma. We need to think of the big picture and think of where we're going. The key message that I would propose is each of us needs to review our ECMO pathways, discuss and plan your ECMO watches, just like Anne-Marie has said, but institute ECMO early. Don't rely on eCPR, and really, really clearly define who is not for eCPR. That's a really key team decision. We need to predict who might deteriorate and share that information amongst the team. Use your early warning scores, as Peter's mentioned. Do good CPR, as Peter has mentioned. I'm keen to see eCPR reducing in incidence across nations, because I think it's a mistake and I think we're doing it wrongly if that's the case. We need to, as Tim has mentioned, optimize neurodevelopmental follow-up in each of our programs so that actually we know the long-term outcomes and we follow a similar pathway in each of these patients so we know what's going on. Key message, we need to optimize our healthcare spending. And I'll leave you with one final key message, because the definition of an insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. And I think that's what we're doing with eCPR. I rest my case.
Thanks, Mark. Really, really cool. So I was thinking with John to start the debate and in the meantime to look at the question from the audience. I cannot see Anna-Marie. I can see now.